This is the Books Podcast presented by Tim Hague.
This is the Books Podcast, which is coming today from the Two Chairman pub just off Trafalgar Square for an excellent reason, and it's because we're talking about Mike Ripley's new book, Angels and Others. And Angel, in the title, is your principal character. He's your almost alter ego, and I think you said that this is one of the few pubs in London that Angel has never been in.
I don't think so, no. I'll have to see if I can rectify that with hindsight. But he would have done, given half a chance. But Trafalgar Square, it's been a bit refined for Angel.
It's also a bit central for him. I'm sure he's driven around it in Armstrong.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to come to Armstrong in a minute, because I want to tie down for the listener who Angel is. We're almost in crime writing territory, but sort of not quite. Or are we?
I think so. I mean, I think it's that strange, rarefied side street, some would say ghetto, of crime writing called comedy crime. There ain't very many of us doing it, and it doesn't pay very well, but it's fun. But there is a long tradition, actually, in English crime writing, and that's where I found myself by accident. I started off wanting to write a funny book, and it ended up being read by the editor of Collins Crime Club, who thought it was hysterical.
And picked it up. And so it became part of that.
And I suddenly realised I was a crime writer.
And as a matter of fact, the first time we ever met you and we was at they published an anthology of crime stories, and there was an Angel story in that.
The first Angel story, I think, yeah.
Which is, of course, in this book, because it's a collection of stories. I want to talk, before we talk about this book in particular, about Angel himself. What's he like? What does he do?
As little as possible.
Bit of a loafer.
Yeah, he was best described by somebody as a young Arthur Daly with a degree, which I quite like, and I thought about that only this week, because of course George Cole has recently passed away. But I think George Cole would have approved of the sort of character. He desperately tries to be unconventional, in the sense that he starts life back in the late 80s as a jazz trumpeter, when absolutely nobody was listening to traditional jazz or giving it much of a thought. And when it became popular, sort of revived, then he immediately went off it and went into a salsa band when nobody had ever heard of salsa. But now, of course, and he keeps
overtaking.
He keeps having to move on to be behind the times, if you see what I mean. But he's definitely he's not somebody who's dropped out so much as he never dropped in. I mean, he consciously stays outside of things. He has no mortgage, he has no dependents, he has no responsibilities. And for a long time, you don't think he's got in the course of the books, he doesn't appear to have a family. But in the end, I had to sort of relent and introduce the family after about 6 books.
Well, there is in the course. There are 15 books, I think, in the
altogether.
Yeah. So you had to fill in, perforce. You had to fill in some of the backstory.
Yes.
There are other ways that you characterise Angel, and that's, of course, the characters that you surround him with. You've joked that the books are really about his cat. He's got a cat called Springsteen, who is psychotic and dangerous, and everybody's frightened of Springsteen. And that sort of characterises him, because Angel has a curious relationship with the cat. He clearly loves it and cares about it, and in one of the books he gets very cross because somebody kicks him.
Oh, yes.
And yet it's hard to feel any warmth towards Springsteen.
Well, I don't care, because Angel doesn't care, and Springsteen certainly doesn't care. So, I mean, they have each other. One's a sidekick to the other. I'm not sure which is which, but they were a good duo, I think.
Well, trio if you include Armstrong.
Yeah, and of course there are casualties along the way.
Tell me about Armstrong.
Well, Armstrong is a black cab. Is a delicensed London black taxi. They're all lost in type originally, and this appealed to Angel because it's the one thing that you can follow people around in London and nobody notices you, because there are black cabs everywhere. Also, you can park on W lines and don't get parking tickets so much. And that was inspired by the fact that I was at university with a madman who actually bought one I didn't realise you can actually buy them. In those days, as long as you didn't drive them in London, you could buy one once they'd finished their life as a cab. And I thought, God, this is wonderful.
Because they're wonderful machines.
Yeah,
they're fabulous cars.
And I've since owned cars that built by BMW that don't have the turning circle of a 50-year-old Austin, but I love them, and it just seemed the best vehicle. I mean, then of course the disadvantage is that when he goes out into the country, he sticks out like a mile. So the Angel books where that does happen, something does happen.
One of the books he goes out to Wales. You can spot him hundreds of miles
coming.
away.
Yeah. In fact, I think one of them he goes on a fox hunt in Cambridge.
Yes, which it really doesn't work in a black cab. As well as the Angel stories, and there are half a dozen of those, there's another, 7 stories, so that makes 13 altogether. I want to talk about one of them. My favourite of the non-Angel stories is that final one, whose name is Old Soldiers. It's very short. I mean, you say that you can't write short stories. That one's very short and absolutely packed. And, well, tell me about it. I could tell you about it, but why don't you tell me?
That was... there was I normally respond to people saying we're doing an anthology, and an anthologist called Mike Ashley, I think it was, who's done lots and lots of crime anthologies, told me that he was doing the mammoth book of Roman mysteries or Roman whodunits. And I thought this was fantastic because at the time I was working as an archaeologist and digging what's known as the Boudiccan layouts of destruction during the Boudiccan revolt in AD 61. And I was into all that. And
the old soldiers in this story are Roman soldiers.
They are, sorry, yeah.
And occupying Roman
and
soldiers.
So I started researching the whole period of the Roman invasion and as an archaeologist. And I discovered that some of the first legions to go west, after they landed in Kent, was actually commanded by the man who went on to be the Emperor Vespasian, which I thought, that's interesting. And he went to Dorset and to Maiden Castle and places like this where I'd been and I knew. And so I started looking into that, and I just got this idea because the whole thing was about druids and whether I had this. There's a lot of romantic stuff about druids, and in my view, they were a sort of cross between the Taliban and the SS. I mean, they were the shock troops of Celtic religion, and the Romans didn't like them. And everywhere else the Romans went, they allowed the local religion to carry on, as long as it changed its name, changed the name of the gods to the Roman ones, but the practice went on straight. The only 2 places where this didn't happen were Palestine, where they had a bit of a head-banging session with the Jews.
Yeah, the Jews are troublesome.
The Jews wouldn't conform. Yeah. And in Britain, with the Celtic Druids, a particular strain of Druids there. And so they wiped them out. And they wiped them out on Anglesey, which was the Holy Island. They attacked it. But in this campaign against the Druids, I just had the vision, what happens if you had a Roman soldier who met one? And it was talking about it sort of years afterwards. And it's this little thing about how I won't give it too much away.
No, don't give it away, because there's a little twist. It's
there is a
5-page story.
Which is another thing I discovered. But it's basically, the soldiers were soldiers like they are today.
Yeah, you've got a little sideline in historical fiction, haven't you?
You did a book,
done
2 or 3. I've done
about Hereward the Wake, which I thought was terrific. I enjoyed
yes, I did a book about Boudica. And I've also written one about King Arthur, which nobody in their right minds will publish. But
I was wondering how I didn't know that one.
But that was the twist, because I found there's a little bit of Roman military MacGuffin, as it were. And I said, what happens if a druid found this out? And the whole style is like the Magnificent Seven. It's fairly hard-boiled Western. We're heading for a shootout because we're going to get you.
Well, because your take on this is that soldiers are soldiers, wherever they are in the world and whenever they were.
Yeah, that's right. And they've been told go in there, maximum force at the point of impact, fewest casualties possible, and that's their job. And they do it. Damn the consequences.
And in addition to 13 stories, there's a screenplay. Again, you've got form in this screenplay business. I read a book called Double Take 10 or 15 years ago of yours, which it wasn't an Angel book, but it was a sort of a heist, a caper, stealing something from Heathrow, I think.
Stealing everything from Heathrow.
Yeah, which you did as a novel and as a screenplay.
No, it was written as a screenplay first.
But it was published as...
But yeah, because it was never made.
And there's an Angel screenplay in this book. How did that come about?
Well, that was the rights to Angel were bought with the second book, and then nothing happened. And after about 6 years, I got the rights back, and they were sold again. And this time, the company that bought them wanted to go big time and do a almost like a Morse, Inspector Morse. They wanted to do a 2-hour film as a pilot, and they offered me a lot of money to write the screenplay, which I did. And I handed it in, and about a week after handing it in, the company went bust.
Well, at least they paid you.
Yeah, and then they actually asked me if I'd like to buy the rights back for more than they paid me. Which I thought was Angel would approve of that. And I said, no, I'll just wait the next 2 months until they revert to me automatically, which is what happened.
So that's how this...
And that was done nearly 20 years ago, I think, the screenplay. I'll get on for that. And honestly, has only been seen on Earth by one other person, apart from me. And I found it in a box and said to the editors of this book, how about sticking one of these in as well? Because I know people liked when we did the same thing with Double Take, because people are curious, very curious as to how a story will get into a screenplay format.
We've touched on some other writing, and I want to have a quick word before we finish about crime writing in general. You do a newsletter called Getting Away with Murder, which, by the way, I really like. It brings me up to date. You know everybody and everything that's going on. And
I'm having to join Name Droppers Anonymous.
And why not? But
as I said to the Duke of Edinburgh only yesterday.
What I was going to ask is, it seems to be other genres. You know, your science fiction genre is full of geeks, and your romance genre is for ladies with cats, or
romance.
In some cases, ladies with husbands who are
romantic fiction.
Less used to cats.
That's dangerous.
But
don't go there.
Crime writing is genre but mainstream. It seems to me to be. It's not occupied by odd corners of people in the same way. And
there are one or two weird areas. There are one or two places where you don't like to lift the stone too much, and there are. I've reviewed books this year that are written in terms of texts and what the hell do they call those face things?
Emoticons.
Yeah. And it's all done like that to be trying with it. And I thought, oh, give us a break, just
5 years from now, though.
Just find a body. Yeah, they will be. But then again, as I said at the beginning, I'm in that great little ghetto of comedy crime writers where we just do it for a laugh.
Well, you know what still will be readable 5 years from now? Angels and Others by Mike.
Well, I certainly hope so.
Oh, I'm absolutely sure of it. Mike, thank you very much. Let me get you another pint.
About time too.
That was the Books Podcast with Tim Haig. The Books Podcast is produced by Green Shoot. You can find out more at www.green-shoot.com, and Tim can be contacted on tim@green-shoot.com.